If someone had told me that one ordinary dinner would lead me down a path that changed how I saw myself, my marriage, and even life itself, I would have laughed. But life has its ways of surprising us when we least expect it. My husband's boss, someone I had only thought of as a distant figure, became the story I never imagined myself telling. A story not about scandal, but about an awakening, a moment of unexpected connection and the quiet stirring of something I had long kept buried. Before I begin, let me ask you something. From which city are you watching tonight? Are you sitting in a small town where everyone knows your name, or in a busy city where the lights never dim? I love imagining where these words land, what kind of living room or kitchen you're sitting in, what kind of night surrounds you as you listen to my story. It all began on a cool evening in late September. My husband, David, had been working long hours at the firm, and his boss, Timothy, had invited us over for dinner. Timothy was one of those people who carried an air of quiet authority, never loud, never boastful, but with a presence that filled a room even when he said nothing. I had met him a few times before, always in formal settings, always with a polite handshake and small talk about the weather or David's latest project. I thought I knew who he was, professional, distant, maybe even a little cold. I had no idea how wrong I was. The invitation had come casually, almost unexpectedly. David had mentioned it over breakfast. Timothy asked if we'd come over for dinner Friday night, he said, his eyes half on his coffee, half on the news playing softly in the background. I remember nodding, not thinking much of it. Just another work dinner, I thought, where I'd smile, make conversation, and let the men talk business. Timothy's home was nothing like I had imagined. I expected something modern, sleek, filled with glass and steel. Instead, it was warm, almost rustic, with bookshelves lining the walls, soft amber lighting, and the faint smell of cedar lingering in the air. The moment I stepped inside, I felt an odd sense of comfort, as if I had walked into a place that wanted me there. Tour began with the usual pleasantries. Timothy asked about my work, something most people overlooked, since I wasn't tied to the corporate world the way David was. His questions weren't casual, though. He listened, really listened, as I spoke about the small art classes I taught in the community. There was something disarming in the way his eyes held mine, not in a forceful way, but in a quiet acknowledgement that what I was saying mattered. As the evening unfolded, the conversation drifted from business to books to art to music. Timothy surprised me with his depth. He spoke about poetry with the same ease he spoke about contracts, and when I mentioned a painter I admired, he nodded knowingly, sharing a memory of seeing the artist's work in a small gallery years ago. There was a moment, small, fleeting, but powerful, that I will never forget. I had excused myself to step into the kitchen, offering to help with dessert. Timothy followed, carrying the empty wine glasses. The kitchen light was softer than the dining rooms, and for a moment it felt like the world outside those walls ceased to exist. He set the glasses down and simply said, "You have a way of making people feel at ease, Sharon. It's a rare gift." I don't know why those words sank so deeply into me. Maybe because it had been so long since anyone had noticed me in that way. Not as a wife, not as a hostess, but as a woman with something unique to offer. I felt a warmth spread through me, not from the wine, but from the simple sincerity in his tone. The night went on and nothing inappropriate happened. There were no stolen touches, no whispered promises, but there was something in the air, an unspoken awareness between us, a recognition that neither of us had expected. I caught myself glancing at him across the table more than once, and each time he met my gaze with a look that was steady, calm, yet filled with something I couldn't quite name. When David and I finally left, the cool night Air greeted us. My husband chatted casually about work as we walked to the car, but my mind lingered elsewhere. I could still feel the echo of Timothy's words, the weight of his attention. It wasn't desire in the reckless sense. It was something quieter, deeper, a reminder that even at 52 there were still parts of me waiting to be seen, waiting to be touched, not by hands, but by understanding. That night, lying beside David as he drifted quickly into sleep, I stared at the ceiling. My mind replayed the evening, the conversations, the subtle energy that had passed between Timothy and me. I wasn't foolish. I knew the boundaries, the realities, but I also knew that something had shifted inside me. I didn't expect his presence to linger the way it did. In the days that followed, I found myself recalling his questions, his voice, the way he noticed details most others missed. It wasn't a crush, not in the adolescent sense. It was more like being awakened, reminded of a part of myself that had gone quiet over the years. Looking back now, I realize that the story truly began that night. Not with fireworks, not with any act that could be called betrayal, but with a spark. Gentle, steady, undeniable. A spark that would grow in ways I could never have foreseen. And though I couldn't have known it then, Timothy was about to become the story I never expected to live. The days after that dinner moved like leaves across a porch, quietly, a few at time, but somehow the whole scene kept changing. I went back to my routines, too. The slow rhythm of my art classes, and the grocery lists and the small rituals that make up a marriage. Yet there was a new awareness tucked under everything. The way you sometimes discover a hidden pocket in a familiar coat and can't stop slipping your hand into it just to feel that it's there. I hadn't done anything wrong. Nothing had happened. Still, the air around me felt charged like the second before a summer storm when all the dry grass holds its breath. On Wednesday, an email arrived. Simple, unadorned, written in the same professional tone he might use to approve a budget. Sharon, it began. Our firm sponsors a community arts evening every fall. I remember you teach, and Kate's small shows. Would you be open to advising us this year? Only if it's comfortable for you. And for David. If not, no worries at all. Timothy. There was nothing in those lines that would raise an eyebrow. No subtext anyone could point to. But when I read and reread it, I heard the softness between the words, the same softness I had felt in his kitchen when he told me I had a gift for putting people at ease. I showed the email to David that evening while he was peeling potatoes at the counter. He skimmed it, nodded, and said, "That could be good for you." He meant it. My husband is a decent man with a careful heart. He just has a way of focusing on the nearest task, like those potatoes, until the rest of the room goes quiet in his mind. I waited for a question that didn't come. Not how do you feel about this? Or, do you want me there? Just the nod, the encouragement, and then the rhythm of the knife against the cutting board. I told myself it was enough. 4 years it had been. I replied to Timothy, yes, with the condition that everything be transparent. He agreed immediately, suggested we meet in the caffeine near the public library in the bright light of Saturday morning. He wrote that David was, of course, welcome to join. I asked David. He had a client call he couldn't miss. It's fine, he said. You know what you're doing. The cake smelled like cinnamon and fresh paper. Sunlight made a warm square on the floor, and the hum of quiet conversations braided itself around the clink of teaspoons. Timothy arrived on time, no tie, just a navy sweater and a calm face that held something almost like relief when he saw me. He kept his voice light. We talked about the event, local artists who struggled to find an audience, the joy of giving them a room where their work could be seen. He asked thoughtful questions, took notes in a small black notebook that looked well loved. The conversation never strayed into what neither of us said out loud, and yet there was a steady current under it, the recognition that we were not just planning an evening, we were negotiating a boundary with care. At one point he paused, pen resting on the page, and said it outright. I want to be respectful of you and of David. If this ever feels complicated, tell me, and I will step back. Immediately, he looked at me the way a good physician looks before he touches a wrist for a pulse, asking permission without speaking. That one gesture, that willingness to step back, drew me closer in a way that nothing else could have, because it reassured the part of me that had been clenching its jaw, prepared to defend everything I had built. Consent isn't only about bodies. It's about conversations, directions, the path a moment chooses. In that cafe we were both choosing the careful path. We scheduled studio visits and reached out to 3 artists I taught years ago, women who worked after their kids were asleep, a retired electrician who painted nightscapes, a nursing assistant who made collages from old hymnals. As I spoke to them, something unclenched inside me. I remembered that I loved not just making art, but lifting other people's work into the light. When I sent Timothy an email full of images and names and little stories about each artist, he responded with a warmth that didn't gush. He simply said, "This feels right." Weeks have a way of walking faster when you are building something. The gallery space the firm donated wasn't fancy high ceilings, yes, but scuffed floors and track lighting that needed coaxing. I spent a morning with a ladder and a pencil behind my ear, measuring and remeasuring. Timothy came by in the afternoon with bottled water and a roll of painter's tape, and together we traced a quiet pathway along the walls. He listened when I explained how a bright piece could smother a subtle one if he placed them too close. He held the ladder steady when I climbed. At one point our hands brushed as we reached for the same level, barely more than a second of skin to skin, and we both pulled back with the same small, almost shy smile. A gentle apology hung in the air, unnecessary but understood. When the night of the event arrived, the city was wearing its best version of autumn. The maple in front of the building had turned a lake-deep red. The gallery smelled faintly of fresh paint, and the paper of the labels I had typed and trimmed by hand. People arrived in 2s and 3s, coworkers, neighbors, a few reporters from the local paper. David came straight from work, his tie slightly wilted, his eyes bright with the kind of pride that carries a little surprise mixed in. He kissed my cheek and squeezed my hand. "Look at this," he said, and there was wonder in it. Timothy kept his distance at first, greeting guests, letting me do my work. When he finally stood at the small microphone we had borrowed from the firm's audio closet, he did something I didn't expect. He told a story about his mother, who had kept a folder of her favorite postcards in a kitchen drawer, because she believed beauty should live where people make their daily bread. He spoke about ordinary rooms needing extraordinary things. Then he thanked me by name, publicly, simply for curating the show and for teaching in our community. He didn't overplay it. He didn't turn me into a symbol. He just saw me out loud in a way that made my shoulders relax in a way they hadn't in years. People wandered through the space with the slightly slowed pace that comes when they are afraid to rush past what might change them. The retired electrician sold his first painting. The nursing assistant stood in front of her college as if standing beside an old friend. I moved from person to person, answering questions, accepting congratulations, translating the small intentions the artists had stitched into their work. And then near the doorway I saw David watching me with a look I recognized from early in our marriage. Proud, amused, a little astonished. He took my hand again. "I forgot how you light up around this," he said. "I'm sorry. I forgot. It is a tender thing when someone you love admits they stop seeing a part of you. It is tender, too, to realize you had let that happen because it felt easier than asking for more. I looked at him, really looked, and I saw the man who had changed the oil in my car on a freezing November afternoon. Because money was tight. I saw the man who had learned to cook a decent soup when my mother was ill and I was too tired to stand at the stove. He hadn't meant to set my spark on a low flame. Life had just asked to be fed from too many pots at once. Later, when the room had thinned and the maple outside the window was a dark silhouette against the streetlight, Timothy came over to say good night. "You did well," he said. Then with that same careful tone, "Would you be open to making this an annual thing?" "I won't presume. I'll ask each time." "Ask," I said, "and I'll answer." He nodded, and for a moment the three of us stood there. David, tired but easy in his skin. Timothy, attentive and respectful. Me standing between the two versions of my life that had felt at odds and suddenly didn't. It was a quiet tableau, the sort of scene that would look simple to a stranger, but inside me something settled in place. The story, it seemed, could be honest and spacious at the same time. The next week, when the last label had been peeled off the wall and the gallery keys returned, I asked David if we could talk. Not the kind of talk that lands like a gavel, but the gentler kind that rearranges furniture so a room can be lived in again. We sat at the kitchen table with mugs of tea, the kind we always forget to finish. I told him I had felt invisible. I told him that the dinner at Timothy's house had woken something I didn't want to lose. I told him I loved him. I also told him that love at our age isn't just about loyalty. It's about paying attention, about choosing wonder when habit offers the cheaper seat. He listened. Really listened. At first he looked down at his hands. Then he looked at me and didn't look away. He didn't defend himself. He didn't bring up the mortgage, or the long hours, or the endless meetings. He said, "I didn't know we could ask for more." Now, I thought the asking part was for the beginning. We both smiled at that. Softly, tired, grateful. We made a small plan, not a grand one. One night a month. For the gallery or a concert. A question asked each Sunday that had nothing to do with schedules. He put the dates on his phone as if pinning flags to a new map. I heard from Timothy only occasionally. After that, brief notes, a thank you, a link to a grant I might share with one of the artists. He kept his promise to ask each time. We met once more that winter in the same cafe, the windows breathing small clouds of heat into the cold. He told me about a loss he had never quite folded into words, the end of a marriage that had left him a little wary of kindness he hadn't earned. He didn't say it to invite pity. He said it like a man putting down a heavy box he had carried a long way. I told him about the early years with David, the sharp edges and the small miracles. We spoke like people who understand that life is made from mixed colors, not clean lines. Before we left, he said, there was a moment that first night when I felt something I hadn't expected. I owe you the truth of that, but I also owe you the respect of not turning it into something it doesn't need to be. I thanked him, not because I needed the confession, but because I needed the dignity of it. In another version of our lives, perhaps we would have missed each other entirely, or met at the wrong time, and burned everything down. In this version, we were careful. We made the adult choice, which is sometimes the bravest one, to let a feeling be a compass rather than a destination. Spring came slowly that year, as if the trees had to remember the choreography of their leaves. My classes filled up. The electrician painted a dawn sky and brought it to the studio with a grin so wide it made the room brighter. David started asking on Sundays, "What surprised you this week?" Sometimes my answers were small, the weight of a new brush in my hand, the way rain sounded on the mailbox. Sometimes they were larger. I told him how relief feels a lot like peace when you finally let it He started answering the question back to me. We stitched a new habit out of our words, a small quilt that kept us warm. On the anniversary of the exhibit, the firm hosted another evening. New artists, new stories pinned to the label corners, new neighbors drifting in with curiosity in their pockets. Timothy was there, of course, greeting people, making sure the lights behaved. When he caught my eye, across the room, he lifted a hand in that small salute that says, I see you. Now I want you. Now I need you to be anything other than exactly what you are. I lifted my hand back. It was simple. It was enough. There are people who will hear a story like mine and look for the scandal. They will search the margins, squinting for the lines where something went wrong. But that isn't this story. This is the story of a woman who remembered the sound of her own voice. It is the story of a marriage that learned midstream how to lean toward the light again. And yes, it is the story of a man who could have become a mistake, but instead chose to become a mirror, reflecting back what was already there, asking gently, do you see it? I think about that first night in his kitchen sometimes, not to relive it, but to honor it. The soft light, the clink of glasses, the sentence that landed so quietly in me that it changed the furniture of my mind. You have a way of making people feel at ease. A rare gift. I carry it now the way you carry a key. On a ring, not clutched in a fist, but ready when a door appears. The world still surprises me. I am 52, and I am not done being astonished. I have learned that there are chapters we never expected to write that turn out to be the ones that steady our hands for all the pages after. Sometimes the person who unlocks that chapter is the last person you would choose from a lineup. Sometimes he is your husband's boss, standing quietly at the edge of a room, noticing the way you arrange a painting so it can breathe. If you are listening from your city tonight, from a porch in the South where the air holds the scent of cut grass, from a high window in New York where the traffic calms the dark, from a kitchen table in a small town where the clock over the stove ticks like a kind old friend, then hear this with me. Life is not finished with you. Your story is not finished with you. Attention is a kind of love. Respect is a kind of devotion, and wonder, when it finally arrives, is not a betrayal of your past, but a bright thread that ties what you were to what you are becoming. I used to think the important moments would arrive with trumpets. Now I know they slip in on quiet feet and wait for you to notice. That night in September, I noticed, and because I did, this is the life I get to live. One where the marriage I chose breathes easier. One where the work I cherish fills rooms with people who are changed by looking. One where the man who could have been trouble is instead a grateful footnote. My husband's boss became the story I never expected, but not because of the danger he posed, because of the door he pointed to and the way he stood back while I walked through.